The NHL playoffs march on, and the conference finals are getting closer and closer to their end. Who continues to have the edge? Which teams are in some trouble? Find out on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, I just really love and appreciate your support. Like I said, tonight's episode, we're going to be kicking off with some recent conference finals updates, some thoughts on these series as I've been able to catch them. They've been pretty fun. I would say, like, right off the bat, this has probably been arguably one of the most interesting playoffs we've seen. For once, it kind of feels like the field's a little more wide open. Not that it hasn't been, like boring before, or that it wasn't exciting before, but it sort of felt like you had a typical cast of characters and appearances, right? Colorado usually involved, Vegas usually involved, some combination of like Tampa Bay in the mix. And so it's nice that the Eastern Conference Finals, while you do have some returners in Dallas and Florida, you still have some different looks, right? Like the Rangers haven't been around this late in the postseason too often, and Edmonton certainly has not really been this far in a very long time. So, for the Oilers, I guess they're feeling like this is their year. Very interesting series that we've seen on both sides. But the first one that's probably worth talking about is Edmonton-Dallas. That has been a pretty tight series, and we'll talk about who might have the edge in just a quick moment. Before we go any further, though, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Stay tuned to hear more about how Gametime can save you time and money on your next ticket purchase. Now, like I said, Edmonton-Dallas currently tied 2-2. Next game going to be tomorrow evening, and it promises to be pretty interesting. It's been a very seesaw back-and-forth series. Edmonton having won the most recent bout in a pretty surprising fashion. After Jason Robertson kind of schooled Edmonton the game before, Edmonton got the last laugh yesterday. Seems like each team has traded some big goal-scoring outputs. 5 goals for the Oilers yesterday, and in the last game, 5 goals for the Stars. So it's pretty interesting. I think individual players have really stood out in some good and maybe some not so good ways. I think one big adjustment for the Oilers was giving Cody Ceci less ice time. They made some back-end changes, and I don't know, probably didn't have a reasonable impact, especially when Cody Ceci has been, well, let's just be honest, pretty bad. He's really struggled to keep up. It's probably not that dissimilar from what the Jets have dealt with Neil Pionk. It's just unlike Pionk, because Ceci actually did see a demotion in his ice time. So something to keep an eye out for if the Jets ever decide to do something like that. Just saying, maybe it'll actually help them win. I don't know. But one player who I really think has stood out on Edmonton's side this postseason, I mean, look, this team has some crazy, crazy talent, right? But a guy who I really feel like doesn't get a lot of attention despite being one of their most key contributors is Evan Bouchard. Bouchard's really come into his own after a couple years where it seemed like there was some talk about him maybe being, I don't know, I wouldn't say a bust, but perhaps a big disappointment. And I felt like that was probably a little premature to sort of dub him as that, especially because he had a ton of talent in junior. It seemed like he was very much on a path to really big success. And so for me, I sort of felt like some patience was required, and it seems like he has really blossomed. I mean, he's been a huge force of offense on their back end. He's been a key cog of Edmonton's power play and their even strength scoring. His fingerprints are all over the series. He had the sixth goal of the postseason so far for him, which is pretty crazy. You don't really see many blue liners having that much of an offensive presence in the postseason, so it tells you a lot about him really being a key cog and a really key contributor. And defensively, he's really blossomed into a really strong puck-moving blue liner with some smarts in his own end. I mean, he's tough to get around. He's very good at zone exits and transition. Very fun player, and somebody who, sometimes I feel maybe lives a little bit in the shadow of, McDavid and Draisaitl. Those guys are always going to get the attention because, well, rightfully they are two of the biggest attackers on that team. And so it's not super shocking that they do tend to draw a lot of the attention. But I think Bouchard probably shouldn't be forgotten. He continues to just really be a monster. And I think that's where, for the Stars, there's a slight challenge in dealing with those moment-to-moment plays, right? Because the Stars on paper for me have the deeper team. Their bottom six and like their talent up and down the roster for me is deeper than what the Oilers have. But the thing is Edmonton can kind of put out these top superstar players for like 35 minutes a game into overtime and stuff. And those guys have the ability to just take over shifts at any moment in the game and really turn the tide. And that's where I think, the Oilers may have a surprising edge there. Now, for the Stars, I don't think they're too worried right now. They've gotten some really great performances from Jason Robertson. He is, I mean, if you've not like watched him outside of Jets games, you honestly owe it to yourself just to enjoy it. He's a great player. I love watching him. I really wish he was a Jet. He's one of my favorite non-Winnipeg players in the Central to watch do that crafty, skilled scoring stuff that he does. He's such a smart player down low. And I really think that in Game 5, he's going to have a really prominent role again. What I would also say with the Stars that's really stuck out is how good Matt Duchene has been. It's kind of been the theme this year where I don't know if anyone expected him to be as helpful to them as he's been. I kind of view him almost like picking up Paul Stastny for the 2017-2018 Jets. Duchene's really been a superior two-way center with a great shot. And like, he's not like a big defensive expert or anything, but the big thing that he does is offer excellent play down low. He's super smart, very dynamic, and very good passer. And he just adds another really good top six center to almost any line you want to use, whether it's the third line, the second line, whatever you want to deploy him as. It gives you some crazy, crazy depth to work with. That Stars team is just really crazy with the matchups. I mean, like I've said before on previous episodes, I really feel like they're the team that closely matches the 2017-2018 Jets out of all these teams in the postseason. I do wonder if Ottinger's going to be able to hold up. And I don't think it's really on him that they've lost any of these games, but I'm sure that, in some of these scenarios, they're maybe asking him to try and bail him out a little more. I don't think that's really fair. I think, to be honest, the Stars were just second best in this previous game. But when you're dealing with the kind of talent that the Oilers have on the top end, you might have to ask a little bit more of your goalie, which perhaps isn't as fair. I think on their back end for the Stars, Suter's probably going to have to get some time off. He has definitely struggled in this postseason. It's putting a lot more pressure on Tanev, and I think Tanev at times has struggled recently, which is going to happen against, some of the craziest players in the league. But that's why the Stars have some amazing roster depth on the back end to try and sort of fill it out and maybe make some of those matchups a little easier. And, with the skill and depth that they definitely have the ability to try and maybe win some of those bottom six matchups and stuff to, make the McDavid effect a little bit less painful. But all I can say is just pray you don't take another penalty against them, because that Oilers power play is pretty dang automatic. Now, between these two series, I'd say this one's probably for me the more coin flippy one. The other series that's ongoing, of course, Eastern Conference Finals between the Rangers and Panthers. Game 5 just wrapped up. We'll talk about that series and what's been particularly interesting with that in just a quick moment. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Gametime. When it comes to buying tickets, a lot of you are probably used to lots of surprise fees, hidden charges, And sometimes when you buy tickets, you're not even sure where you're sitting. Gametime gets it. They've been there before. They know exactly what you're dealing with, and that's why they offer killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and when available, views from your seat so you actually know what you're paying for. That's especially helpful for those of you who are trying to get to the NBA Finals. Obviously, you know that it's not going to be a cheap time, but Gametime wants to make the process as easy as possible. And best of all, prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer you get to tip-off. They offer last-minute ticket sales, flash deals, zone deals, and of course, you always get backed by their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. For those of you who are like me and you buy lots of tickets, having that protection and guarantee that you are always getting the best deal is really comforting. It's great to know that Gametime has your back and that they're going to give you a great upfront price. A lot of you know that, again, it is expensive, and look, it's a bit of a hobby, but if you want to have the best experience and you want to make sure that you're getting the best view, well, Gametime is here to help, and that's why they help take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Make sure that you get your NBA Finals fix with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us as we are just talking about, obviously, the Eastern Conference Finals are ongoing. We just wrapped up really quickly some thoughts on the Western Conference Finals. Been a fun one, for what I've been able to watch. Eastern Conference Finals, also really tight, although I think if you're a Rangers or Panthers fan, you're probably suffering from some level of cardiac arrest. I am sorry. I am glad I have zero rooting interests because some of these game results would be pretty heartbreaking if I was a New York fan. But, despite a really close loss just now for the Rangers, they are still very much in this series. They're facing a tough opponent, though, and I think we all kind of talked about the Panthers being one of the really bad matchups because Florida, for lack of a better word, they don't, or lack of a better way to describe it, they don't really have any notable weaknesses. You can point to some areas where they're not as elite in some respects, but overall they're really strong, really well balanced, very deep. And like I said, they just don't have that many weak links on their roster, which makes them a real pain to get past. Before we talk about how that's kind of borne out in the series, just wanted to talk to you Fox Sports or ESPN watchers. If you find yourself having to turn down the volume because there's way too much shouting, I recommend making the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you daily to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, like I said, looking at the Panthers, you look at how they've constructed their team this year, and up and down the lineup, they've got good skill mixed with some really strong defensive acumen and good puck-moving ability, and it just makes them a real pain to get by. And then, you realize that on top of the great even strength play, they've also got a really dang good power play. The one thing that, they would probably wish is that they didn't have to face the Rangers power play, because the Rangers PP tends to be one of the biggest threats to Florida's success, but so far it's not been enough to completely tip the balance. I think the Panthers have done a great job of generally having the run of play at 5v5, although I will say that the Rangers have definitely made it challenging. New York is a team that definitely will grind you down physically and try and impede you a lot, which I think is probably very frustrating for Maurice. But the Panthers are also one of those teams that has, a bit of a reputation for maybe using some interference and throwing some picks and stuff. And that's just how the postseason is. You don't really get called on that as much. And so for these teams and for what we've seen in this series, I think the biggest takeaway that I have is that the Panthers just have a little bit more in the tank. That extra bit at 5v5, I think, has made a really big difference. The Rangers just don't really have a margin for error, and I think in the previous game before today, you really saw that Shesterkin was one of the biggest things keeping the Rangers alive. If Shesterkin wasn't in net and if Lafreniere wasn't doing what he's doing recently, which has been earning a really big fat contract extension, New York would probably be a little bit worse off in the series. It's been, I don't want to say a bit of a horror show for guys like Zibanejad, but, well, it's been a little bit of a horror show. Zibat hasn't really been able to show up. And when you look at Barkov and Reinhart and Florida Stars all looking pretty great, I think it really puts into perspective where the Rangers are at, that their top stars, for the most part, have struggled to really make a name for themselves in the series. Kreider obviously had one really big game, but other than that, it's not really been a great series from most of the Rangers' top stars. And you wonder if that's going to reverse before they get themselves to an elimination situation, which, well, guess what? They're there. They are now facing, a Game 6 that is potentially the end of the road for their playoff run. They've had a really great season, but, I think to some degree, the stuff that people were suspicious of heading into the playoffs, especially with their 5v5 play and how they've created a lot of their goals, might eventually catch up to them. I will say that in their defense, not only are the Panthers like a phenomenal team and really deep and well built, but the Rangers have still, for what they've been able to do, made it frustrating for the Panthers. I think it's not been an easy series by any stretch of the imagination. Space has kind of been at a premium, but at the end of the day, I often see the Panthers having those extra trailing breakaways or odd man rushes, those little passes and deflections and things that have put Shesterkin in a really tough spot. And at the end of the day, I still stick to the prediction, coming into the series that ultimately the Panthers were going to get by the Rangers. I did think it would be a little bit close. I thought we might even see 7 games, but I did still think at the end of the day, the Panthers are the ones that are going to get through. And so far it looks to be somewhat on track. We do know that the Rangers have a flair for the dramatic in some of these games, and perhaps Game 6 we'll see that again. I don't want to call things too early, but so far I would say in terms of what at least is happening on the ice and not necessarily the score sheet, it is generally aligning to expectations. Panthers winning at 5v5, Rangers being really threatening on the power play, and at the end of the day, it's probably more in favor of the Panthers. So, the Panthers, really annoying team. If you're rooting for Paul Maurice to get a cup, this might just be your year. If you ask me who has the advantage between the East and the West, that's a tougher call. I kind of feel like the cup really does run through the West this year again, but I could be wrong. I just feel like one of Dallas or Edmonton just has something special this year that could push them through. But the Panthers are a really deep team. If they do beat the Rangers, they're going to be a huge pain in the butt. And, if the Rangers somehow get through, I don't love that for the Eastern Conference as much. I think the Rangers would probably struggle against either of Dallas or Edmonton. I definitely could be wrong about that, but that's just my gut feeling, seeing how hard it's been for them to get through the Panthers as it is. I can't imagine that really gets easier with a Stars team that's not that dissimilar from the Panthers and an Oilers team that has just crazy, crazy top-end talent that can just destroy shifts on an individual level. So darned if you do, darned if you don't. If the Rangers, if you're the Panthers, just keep on keeping on, and you are probably going to another Stanley Cup final. Although this time, maybe you actually win this one. We'll have to keep an eye out for that and talk more about each of their odds as we get closer and closer to the Cup finals here. It's been a fun ride. Honestly, this is probably the most engaged I've actually been in the recent playoff runs outside of Jets hockey, which, probably is something of a testament to how fun and entertaining it's been. Like I said, the playoffs usually for me, not something that I care about too much once the Jets are out. But this year, I've actually been focused and actually paying attention. So fair credit to the NHL playoff bracket this year for actually being pretty entertaining. I'd be curious to know who you're backing and who you would like to see hoist the cup. Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at @IHLLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. In just a little bit, like I said on our previous episode, just wanted to also spend some time talking about next season and some tactical adjustments that I would like to see the Jets make so that they can end up in this side of the Western Conference Finals bracket. I'd love to see them get back to that. And it's going to take a full commitment, not only from the front office, but especially from the upcoming coaching staff, whatever it looks like, as Arniel is still working on developing his own personal list. But we'll talk about what I'd like to see the Jets do in just a quick moment. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're just wrapping up really quickly with some thoughts for Winnipeg's upcoming season. I know we've spent some time off and on talking about how the Jets should structure their roster and all this fun stuff. I wanted to talk a little bit about some higher level overarching tactical adjustments I'd like to see Winnipeg come into next season making. Obviously, there's some really big stuff, but the biggest change that I think the Jets really need to focus on is working more on the speed side of things. I think that's been a bit of an issue, and I don't just mean in skating, right? I mean in quickness of decision-making, passing, all of that stuff. A lot of the top teams, especially teams like Vegas, Colorado, Dallas, Panthers, right? You notice like there's all these quick little interchanges, rapid passes, and they're often on target. I mean, they don't really miss passes. They don't really struggle with quick distribution and stuff down low. A lot of these teams can undress you in literal seconds. And it's not that the Jets can't do that, but I think Winnipeg has not really been built to play that style of almost like tiki-taka hockey. That's where I think Winnipeg really wants to improve on top of just the transition game and north-south speed is sort of that east-west puck movement. How fast can they attack, those wide angles and get the goalies moving from side to side? How can they take advantage of that? And can they start to capitalize on those chances a little more frequently? Winnipeg, I think, struggled with some chance creation this year, partly because of the speed issue, partly because honestly, it just felt like Winnipeg's, top-end roster talent wasn't quite at the level that it needed to be in some crucial moments. And then you had some line combos that just also didn't work. So that's one thing I think the Jets could really work on. I think part of that's going to be a personnel issue. Some of that's going to have to be addressed through some trades and maybe some reorienting of roles for players. Connor should probably not play with Scheifele again. I think that would be helpful. Perfetti, I think, really needs to be given a bigger starring role. I know offensively he maybe dried up a little bit towards the second half of the season, but I think it could be a product of just what Bowness was asking him to do. Arniel, I feel, might have a more open-minded approach to how he creates offense. We'll have to see what his philosophy is. Like I've said, it's really hard to get a read on him, but at least from like the early parts of his conversation, I like where his headspace is at. It's just what is he actually going to do once we get into the season? That's still kind of an unknown for me, but at least press conference-wise, he speaks the right language. So we'll just go with that for now. In terms of like other tactical adjustments, I think one of the biggest things that I really want to see Winnipeg work on really is on that special team side, right? The PK is probably the more pressing and urgent situation. It's just really bad. For some reason, and I don't know if this was an Arniel thing or if this was something on the support staff, but like the lack of pressure and the way that the Jets PK diamond really gave too much space and respect to opponents has to change this upcoming season. They really need to be aggressive. They need to try and pressure those carriers into making mistakes. And, I think Winnipeg would actually get more odd man and like breakaway situations off of that. I don't want to say like you want to like just sell out completely and do something stupid, but I think you can be a little more aggressive. Winnipeg's PK last year was like league average, and I think that was pretty darn good, actually. If you had a league average PK, you'd be feeling pretty decent about your special teams. Power play, well, we'll get to that in a little bit, but I think the PK getting to just even average territory for Winnipeg would be a tremendous upgrade. I think it would be probably a bit of a relief for the Jets. I think they've struggled to understand why it's been so ineffective. I'm sure the players are doing whatever they're being told to, and it's probably why if Lauer had, a say in this, he's been let go. I think that was really not working out. But yeah, if you get a more aggressive PK and if you close off that space, I mean, like personnel-wise, I think the Jets have the ability to have at least an average PK. It doesn't need to be great, but any pressure that they can pull off of Hellebuck would be great. He's just kind of mediocre on the PK, and that's a bit of a recipe for disaster when the Jets' PK itself is, well, big stinky doggy doo-doo. So let's work on that next season. One thing for the power play, I think, is well, the power play has like a lot of different issues, but I think for me the biggest fix would be diversifying your scoring options. You noticed that when Velarde moved down low, it solved a lot of problems, but you still had issues where sometimes the Jets either deferred to the wrong option or deferred to the same one repeatedly. And that's where like a diversity of scoring options would make Winnipeg's 5v4 unit a lot more effective. That kind of means that you're going to have to make Connor a little bit more of a complementary piece rather than the key shooter, which I actually think is just helpful for him in general. When he gets lost in PK coverages, it allows him to really pick out his angle and be so much more lethal. Instead of just having him hammer one-timers, have him be the guy on the back end who's just sort of sliding under coverages, looking for those underneath routes, I guess you could call, shadowing the defender and getting right between them and the goal. And I think that would make him a lot more effective. It's not that dissimilar from what you see with Velarde sort of drifting in there and occasionally losing those coverages. I'd also like to see Scheifele take on a different role. I feel like he tries to play off the half wall a lot, and it's just so slow. He is really patient to a fault, which I never thought would be a criticism I'd have of him. But I feel like sometimes he hangs onto the puck a bit longer than he should, and it overcooks those plays to where, opposing PK diamonds have way too much time to adjust, and it's just it doesn't really let you actually get shots off. Either the shot gets deflected or blocked, the goalie already has the read well in hand, and there's just not a lot of movement, not a lot of rapid puck movement and passing. And so you run into a situation where the power play just doesn't really accomplish much. And that's before you even get to the zone entries, which have continued to be a bit of a problem for the Jets, but trying to solve at least some things in zone first before you worry about what the zone entries are like. You probably would want to do it the reverse way in a lot of ways, especially if you're a coach. But to some degree, I don't really understand why the zone entries for the Jets are so bad to begin with. So we'll leave that for a different day. But at least in zone, there's a couple of easier. Well, I say easier. I mean, it's obviously tough because it's hockey and it's a professional level. But on the face of it, there's like some straightforward-ish adjustments that could at least give the Jets a little bit more of a look from what they had in 2017, 2018, when their power play was, quite frankly, pretty scary. It used to be a unit that really scared opponents. And I think if they get to anything close to that, even 80% of that, they're feeling pretty good about their special teams. Average PK, above average power play, decent 5v5, maybe even good 5v5, and you're probably looking at a playoff spot for the Jets next season. So a lot of stuff for Winnipeg to consider. I don't think any of this is going to be like easy, but I mean, that's what the Jets are getting paid the big bucks for. So let's hope that they can come up with a huge season. I'd be curious to know if you think they're going to actually fix their special teams. Do you think the new appointments will make a huge impact? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making us your first listen of the day every day. We'll be back here, hopefully, technical issues and health willing, tomorrow evening. So stay tuned for that. But like I said, for tonight's show, that is all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.